Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Friday, July 3rd, and it's been a rough couple days for your boy. Jaylen Brown has been traded to the Philadelphia 76ers. That news dropped early evening on Wednesday, July 1st, and honestly, I've been in a pretty bad place ever since. I hated the deal when I first found out. I'm less mad now and more confused than anything else, but we're going to sort through my reaction, how the Celtics could have possibly reached the conclusion that trading Jaylen Brown to an in-conference rival was the best course of action. And so we're going to be diving into all that. Obviously, as we sit here on July 3rd, we have a ton of other free agency news as well to just capture all the headlines here. We also had Morant getting effectively salary dumped to the Portland Trailblazers. Kawhi got traded back to Toronto. The Lakers made a really big swing on Walker Kessler and made a flurry of other moves in the wake of finding out LeBron James is not going to be returning to the Lakers next year. And then, of course, we have a bunch of other trades and free agency signings to react to. So the headliner is Jaylen Brown. I know that's what you guys are here for. So I'm going to dive into that in a second. And hopefully you guys enjoy. So let's get rolling with the Jaylen trade here. The Sixers received just Jaylen Brown, and in return, the Celtics received Paul George, a 2028 first-round pick that is most likely going to be the most favorable pick between the Clippers' first-round pick and the Sixers' first-round pick in 2028. The Celtics also received a 2031 first-round pick coming over from Philadelphia and 2 second-round picks in 2028 and 2030. When I found out about this news, I actually could not wrap my mind around a more sickening deal for the Boston Celtics. I absolutely hated it. Regardless of your feelings on Jaylen Brown, if you wanted him off the team or not, I don't think anybody was happy seeing that initial return, and it's just an absolute kick in the balls for really all Celtics fans that have watched this guy in Jaylen Brown, a homegrown talent, 10 years with the team, 5 All-Star appearances, 2 All-NBA selections, and of course, a 2024 NBA champion and Finals MVP. And we basically just dumped him to our in-division rival in the Philadelphia 76ers, who also beat us in the playoffs a couple months ago. And we've also just run into them 3 of the last 6 years in the postseason, so there's a lot of wounds there. This would have been easier to digest if Jaylen got traded to any other team. And if you look at the return for Jaylen Brown, effectively just getting Paul George and 2 first-round picks, like, yeah, sure, the picks are okay, I guess. I mean, that 2028 pick, we don't have the full scope of it yet, but it does look like it's going to be the best pick out of either the Clippers, who are on a bit of a mini rebuild right there, so you project that to be a somewhat high pick, or Philly, who now is pretty well situated the next couple seasons. And a 2031 pick, I mean, that's 5 years out, really difficult to predict that far out. Sure, you can say Embiid's going to be probably pretty washed by then, but even then, Philly has a pretty bright future with VJ, Maxey, and now Jaylen Brown a part of their core, so you can't feel that confident in the 2031 pick. And it honestly doesn't even provide that much financial flexibility for the Celtics either. Because yes, we know that Jaylen was difficult to trade because of how much money he's making the next 3 seasons. His contract is fully guaranteed for $57 million next year, $61 million the year after that, and then $65 million 2 years down the road. But you compare that to what the Celtics got in return with Paul George, who's on the books for $57 million this season and then has a $56 million player option the following season, which don't think I'm breaking any news here by saying Paul George is almost certainly going to be picking up that option. And I don't want to sit up here and act like Paul George is some type of scrub. I know the analytics love him because of his size, because of his defense, because he is a really talented shooter. He knocks down threes in the catch and shoot situation at a really high clip. But analytics does not take into account how unreliable this guy has been. He's always dealing with injuries. He's only played in 60 games once of the last 7 seasons, a really tough track record for him lately. And even though he looked pretty awesome against the Celtics in the playoffs this past year in round 1, that's because he got a 25-game suspension, or as I like to call it, a 25-game vacation in the middle of the regular season where he wasn't playing any games. He was able to rest up, and that's why he looked so fresh against the Celtics, and then subsequently came back down to earth against the Knicks. I mean, he was fine in some moments early on in that Knicks series, but he was awful in the second half of all of those games, had a horrible closeout game against the Knicks, and there was really no market for him. There was no buzz around the league that other teams were certainly trying to acquire Paul George. And with how undesirable his contract is, again, making $57 and $56 million the next 2 years, you would have to assume that Philly probably has to attach a first-round pick just to get off of Paul George's contract. So when you net out the Jaylen trade, it's really like we traded Jaylen Brown for 1 first round pick, which is probably, again, that 28 Clippers pick. And that's just about it when you include the burden of taking back Paul George. And even if you are like the biggest Paul George fanboy on the planet and really hated watching Jaylen Brown for whatever reason the past couple years with the Celtics, I think it is next to impossible to argue that it makes the Celtics better for next season. Like, they're simply a worse team with Paul George in the place of Jaylen Brown. And then when you look at the draft picks that they're able to get back, sure, that 28 pick looks like it's going to be nice, but that's 2 years away from even conveying. And even if you do bring on a rookie that's like a top 5 or a top 10 pick in the 2028 draft, what are the odds that that player is immediately able to step in as a rookie and contribute to a team that I assume that the Boston Celtics would still have some sort of title aspirations or deep playoff run aspirations, because you're still going to have Jason Tatum being a really good spot in his career. The odds that that rookie is able to contribute 1 year in is basically impossible. So you're really looking at like a 2 to 4 year window before you can even reap the benefits of the other assets in this deal beyond Paul George. And I understand you get a little bit of extra flexibility just because Paul George's contract expires 1 year early, and maybe you're looking to use the draft capital that you just got back as extra trade chips, and there's another move to come. But I'm not even trying to be a pessimist in saying that I don't think that there is another trade that Brad Stevens has in his back pocket that's tied to this one. I mean, it's been 2 days since the deal. No other trades that the Celtics have made since then. So I think that this really was the big swing. Now, obviously, I'm still really upset by this deal. Maybe I sound calm just because I've had 2 days to sit with it, but it makes me absolutely sick to my stomach, the idea of giving up on a guy that we've had in our building for 10 years and sending him across the way to Philadelphia, a team that we're going to see 4 times in the regular season and very likely will run into in the playoffs within the next couple of seasons as well. And I will say, like, my first reaction when I saw this deal was a little similar to the Luka deal. Obviously, Luka is a better player. I think that deal is way worse. I don't think that this is on the level of that Luka Doncic trade when you include the lack of shopping Luka around other teams and just how sudden, out of nowhere, the Luka trade came. I can't pretend like this Jaylen trade was out of nowhere. There was a ton of smoke the past couple weeks. It seemed really likely that he was going to get moved, but it's still just a really disappointing return for a franchise cornerstone. But the difference is that we don't have some bum running the team. We don't have some moron like Nico Harrison. And everything to this point, Brad Stevens has done a tremendous job building this team. He doesn't get all the credit for the 2024 championship team because he inherited really solid foundation from Danny Ainge. I feel like you have to give Danny Ainge so much credit for the move that brought Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown into the building. And that was obviously the foundation of that 24 team. And Brad just kind of filled in the gaps. But again, Brad's done an awesome job. So does he get the benefit of the doubt? Like, that certainly doesn't mean I'm not beyond angry and frustrated with him in this decision to trade Jaylen Brown, but I do think it's important to note that this guy has done a really good job. So what led him to this? What made him feel like he had to move Jaylen Brown at all costs, and especially this early on in the offseason? Jaylen is under contract for 3 more seasons, and as far as we know, did not publicly demand a trade. I think that's pretty safe to say. We don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, but I actually did tune into the guy's stream for the first time ever. Jaylen went live on Twitch yesterday just to hear his initial thoughts on getting dealt, and even he, if you want to take his word for it, made it sound like Brad Stevens did not fully explain as to why he moved on from him, and now suddenly the guy's on the Sixers. So it doesn't even sound like Jaylen is getting that much of an explanation, so it certainly doesn't sound like us as fans of the team are going to get any sort of explanation from the front office besides what we already know. And if you did make the determination that you had to trade Jaylen Brown at all costs when this offseason started, why not just trade for Giannis? I feel like it's important for us to start there. I know I talked about it in previous podcasts. By all the reporting around the Giannis deal, it does sound like it came down to Boston and Miami. Obviously, the Bucks made the decision to take the Miami package instead, and the largest reason as to why is because the Celtics were unwilling to provide extra assets along with Jaylen Brown, besides the 2 extra unprotected first-round picks that the Celtics were willing to throw in, but they weren't willing to add any more picks. They weren't willing to add any young players like Hugo Gonzalez or Baylor Shireman to the deal. And that, again, according to what's being reported, is why the Bucks decided to take that Miami package instead. And the Giannis deal, even if we had to throw in Hugo Gonzalez, Baylor Shireman, even an extra first-round pick would have been way more palatable for any Celtics fan to wrap their mind around. Like, hey, Jaylen Brown was a part of it. We had to give up a bunch of extra assets, but at least we got Giannis. At least we got a top 20 player ever. At least we're bringing somebody into the building that, by all accounts, makes the team much better for the next 2 years, assuming that Giannis stays healthy. And again, I don't think Brad Stevens just had an aneurysm and suddenly he's just a complete moron pulling the strings for this Celtics team. And so the fact that we weren't willing to pony up for Giannis and just go all in on him in that bidding war with Miami makes me feel like maybe the whole time Brad would prefer this type of trade. Maybe not this exact return, but it does seem like Brad Stevens would much rather trade Jaylen Brown and be the team getting the draft picks rather than attaching the additional draft picks, the additional assets to make the team better in the short term. Clearly, he wanted to have the financial flexibility of only having one max contract on the books in Jason Tatum and just build it out for the future rather than maximizing this 2 to 3 year window around Jason Tatum for the next few seasons. And now the Giannis stuff that's already been litigated, I think I already discussed it ad nauseum on previous podcasts. So where we were at right before this trade broke a couple days ago is I was in the boat of like, why not just hold Jaylen Brown at this point? It's being pretty well reported that other teams around the league do not see the value in this guy. Maybe that's tied to the analytics that we'll touch on here in a second. Maybe that's just tied to the fact that he's making a shitload of money the next 3 seasons and teams simply don't think he's worth that price. But I just don't understand why the Celtics didn't feel like they had more leverage in this situation. Like, how bad were things behind the scene? I just mentioned what I heard Jaylen say on his Twitch. Yeah, the Twitch stuff seems to rub everybody the wrong way. He's had his name dragged quite a bit through the media, so he's had some prickly comments. He went at Bobby Marks on Twitter because Bobby Marks said some anonymous scout had Jaylen Brown as like the 7th best player on most NBA teams because of what the analytics say, and so he defended himself for that. And yeah, maybe you could have done without those comments, but nothing that Jaylen Brown has done, at least publicly, would warrant, hey, even though he has 3 more years left on his contract, we have to get rid of him right now. And if the return for Jaylen Brown was going to be this minimal, right, a couple first-round picks and what's widely considered around the league as another really bad contract in Paul George, why did we feel the need to do this deal on July 1st? Why couldn't we have waited a little bit, wait for some teams to strike out on some free agent targets, wait for a few other teams to make their moves and make some trades around the fringes? And if things are really that bad, you have to think that this same exact deal would have been here on August 1st or even September 1st. And so the fact that we took the deal right now makes me feel like simply offloading Jaylen Brown was priority number 1, even when the market for him was extremely low for a player of his talent level. And even if the Celtics were particularly high on Paul George and they did not look at his contract as a negative because they think he can add real value to the Boston Celtics for the next couple of seasons, sure, I'll concede that point for the time being. But you're not telling me a single other team in the NBA was willing to offer a similar package where you're also getting 2 first-round picks and some undesirable contracts in return? Like, what are we talking about here? I understand the analytics aren't the best with Jaylen Brown. I understand he makes a lot of money, but there's so many teams out there that would love to bring a proven star into the building that plays hard, that plays well on both ends of the court, that's always available. I feel like teams are constantly lining up to bring guys like that into their building, especially if the price is that low. So like, what is Portland doing? Like, we'll talk about Portland in a little bit and their move to acquire Ja Morant, but why wouldn't they be willing to attach like a Drew Holiday or maybe even some contracts that they value even less and a couple first round picks? And at the very least, you're salary dumping Jaylen Brown to a team that you're not going to have to play 4 times a year and likely again in the playoffs. If we did this same deal to any other team, this would just be so much easier to digest as Celtics fans. But ultimately, that's what Brad Stevens landed on. He ends up sending this guy to the Philadelphia 76ers. And I just feel like it's almost personal at that point. Like, the guy didn't publicly demand a trade. We have him under contract for 3 seasons, and we make the decision to send him to a rival. Not only does that say that Brad Stevens and the Boston Celtics no longer value Jaylen Brown, but they don't fear Jaylen Brown either. Like, they are not remotely worried about the chip that you're putting on this guy's shoulder and having him play for a team that we've competed against so much. Like, that doesn't creep into the back of your mind at all. I mean, apparently not, but that is just pretty dark. Like, that is such a 180 on a homegrown talent. And for the guy that was Jaylen Brown's first coach, and I know that this is obvious to any Celtics fan listening, but Brad Stevens was Jaylen Brown's coach when he was a rookie. He has had a 10-year relationship with this guy, either being his head coach, being his general manager over the past decade. And to just kind of stab him in the back and dump him to Philly is just so fucking heartless for this Celtics team. Like, it's just truly hard to swallow. And just to do a 180 on this guy that's been in the building for 10 years, who you won a championship with, and you paid $300 million to just 3 years ago. And I understand that they were in a tough spot when Jaylen Brown signed the contract that he's currently on. He ends up getting that Supermax extension that's $300 million over the span of 5 years. And you want to pay that guy what he is owed, even after a disappointing playoff series that he had against the Miami Heat in 2023. But if they felt good enough to keep him in the building, and obviously they didn't want to lose him for nothing, so maybe they felt like they had to do this deal. But I'm still just trying to figure out what has changed in between him getting offered that contract, in which, again, we did win the championship just 2 years ago, to where we're at now where they felt like they had to get rid of him. And there's really like two schools of thought that the Celtics could have followed to get them to this point where they felt like they had to trade Jaylen Brown. And I'm not a big analytics guy, so I don't love diving into it on this podcast because I'm not the most well-versed in all the analytics, but it's hard to believe that they did not play a really strong role in this process for the Celtics. And if you guys are unsure of what I'm talking about, despite the fact that the Celtics won 56 games last year and were really impressive without Jason Tatum for most of the season, all the advanced stats say that the Celtics were actually better when Jaylen Brown was off the court. I mean, we had a really good record. I think Jaylen missed like 10 games this past year or 11 games, and we were somehow 9-2 without him. And all the on and off metrics point to the Celtics being a better team when Jaylen isn't on the court. And on the flip side of that, all the analytics also love Paul George. They love his shooting ability. They love his size. They love his defense both on and off the ball. But I would argue that even though Jaylen's style and some of his shot diet, which you can definitely poke holes in, didn't necessarily fit with the rest of the Celtics, I think he was a really great contrast to the rest of the things that the Celtics had going on. And the analytics really don't tell the full story when you're looking at the 2025-2026 Celtics. I mean, we've criticized this team for years on end that they just become so reliant on three-point shots and become so predictable at the end of these games. Having a guy in Jaylen Brown that can play some bully ball, that can create his own shot, that can get to a mid-range, even though that's largely an inefficient shot for most players, Jaylen Brown does shoot that shot at a pretty good clip. And it's just a different type of offense that we really aren't getting from any of our other players. I mean, Tatum has that a little bit. He's going to need to get back to some more ISO creation this year with the added offensive pressure that's going to be on his shoulders. But ultimately, it just feels like Jaylen Brown is being punished because the Celtics did have a really good bench, did have a really good roster and system in place. And because his style didn't fit that of the rest of the team, I felt like he took a hit analytically. And on the flip side, you bring in Paul George, who, yes, he's going to fit nicely in the system. He should fit nicely next to Jason Tatum. He should be able to defend and shoot threes, especially in a catch-and-shoot situation at a higher clip than Jaylen Brown. Sure, that's all nice. But again, that doesn't take into account Paul George's durability, how unreliable he is. And is he going to do anything to help the team get out of a rut when we are 0 for 10 on our last 10 three-point attempts, especially at the end of a tight game? I don't really see Paul George being able to get us any different types of looks because he is so jump shot reliant at this stage of his career. And at the end of the day, like, the analytics are what they are. Some people swear by them. Some people just completely crumple them up and throw them out. And I lean more toward just throwing that shit out when there is proof of concept. We need to stop acting like it's impossible to win with Jaylen Brown. He was a vital piece of the 2024 team. And whether you think he deserved finals MVP or not, he was at worst the 1B on a team that did ultimately make it to the mountaintop. So if it's not the analytics, maybe it's still some of the financial relief of getting off his deal 1 year early, but I find that hard to believe. The next factor that could be at play here is like maybe there is something a little bit more sinister going on with the new ownership group, because that's really the only other thing that's changed since we gave Jaylen Brown that contract. And everybody knows that the team was sold by Wyc Grousbeck, and now Bill Chisholm is majority owner. He's like the figurehead of the team, but most of the money that went into the sale of the Boston Celtics came from 6th Street, which is a private equity group, and it's unclear how much sway they have behind the scenes for these type of decisions. But at the end of the day, everybody has a boss, and the money rules everything about this league. So if the board at 6th Street wanted Jaylen Brown gone, they could have had at least a seat at the table in making this happen. And there's a decent chance that they're just looking at this team just like they would an investment portfolio or a real estate portfolio or whatever, right? And they care more about the cost of the players on their team, the value of the contracts, what the analytics have to say about this. And clearly, the new ownership group doesn't give a flying fuck about the optics of just dumping a franchise player to maybe your biggest rival. Like, I actually think it would have been more palatable to just ship him off to the Lakers, because at least we're not running into the Lakers that frequently, despite all the history between us in Los Angeles. So as I'm trying to just accept this deal and doing my best to move on, even though that kind of feels impossible, you have to ask what's next for the Boston Celtics and where does this leave them? As much as I want to be mad at the team and say, fuck Brad Stevens, and this team's going to be a joke, and they lost a fan in me and all that stuff, like, frustratingly, I still think the Celtics are going to be a really good team. It's hard to argue otherwise when you look at how much they outperformed expectations last year. I'm just saying, from a regular season perspective, we should continue to be pretty dominant. It is worth noting to outline the rest of the Celtics offseason moves here. We did sign Mitchell Robinson to a 3-year, $47 million contract. To give you my thoughts on that, I really don't like it. I understand the value in Mitchell Robinson. I actually had him for Sixth Man of the Year last year. I think he was really important to the Knicks team. He might be the best rebounder in the entire NBA. He's a pretty good rim protector. He's a pretty decent lob threat when he doesn't have a broken hand from some non-basketball related activity leading into the NBA Finals. But obviously I'm holding that against the guy because it does seem like he's a dumbass. I'm sorry. You break your hand not playing basketball right before the biggest series of your life. Even though it worked out for Mitchell Robinson, I can't say I'm too proud to have that guy wearing green right about now. He's always had durability issues even outside of the stupid broken hand. He is probably the worst free throw shooter in NBA history. I think he has the worst free throw percentage in the playoffs ever. He obviously gives you nothing as a jump shooter, and so he's pretty one-dimensional on offense, and I think the fit alongside Neemias Queta, who we also re-signed earlier today, worth noting that Queta got a 4-year, $56 million extension, so he's actually under contract for 5 years because the club also picked up his $3 million option next year. It's a decent price for Queta and how productive he was last year, but now we are locked into 2 non-shooting bigs for at least the next 3 years, and it's actually the next 5 years when it comes to Queta, so I think there's a bit of redundancy there as far as both of them not giving you any sort of floor spacing, both being pretty good rebounders and decent rim protectors. The Celtics also signed Mike Conley to a really cheap 1-year deal in what's likely going to be his last season, so we get another vet in the building. I'm kind of whatever on Conley because I don't think he's going to be playing really important minutes for us ever. We did re-sign Ron Harper Jr. to a 3-year, $9 million contract. That was actually my favorite offseason move so far to retain a nice homegrown player that was pretty productive for us. And Ron Harper, I could see him playing real minutes next year. But if you look at the roster and the totality of all those moves, I do think that last year to this year, the Celtics are better, right? I mean, really all you're doing, because we didn't have Jason Tatum in the mix last year, you're taking Jaylen Brown and you're swapping him out for Jason Tatum, Paul George, and you're also adding Mitchell Robinson to the roster. Like, the team is actually better, at least from a regular season perspective, but at the same time, so is the rest of the East. Like, all these East teams got so much better, and it does feel like our ceiling without Jaylen Brown on the team is so much lower that I'm not going to push back if other people are arguing that the Knicks, the Pistons, the Pacers, the Raptors, even the Sixers are all better than us right now. Like, I don't necessarily agree with that. I'd really have to sort it out, and I do want to wait until the rest of the offseason plays out before I go through my full picture of the Eastern Conference. But there's certainly arguments to be made for all 5 of those teams that I just named. Plus, Cleveland is still in the mix. Miami's still in the mix. Even Charlotte, Orlando, and Atlanta are all teams that should be better than what they were last year that are in the mix. And so suddenly this playoff race in the Eastern Conference is not just going to be a rollover like it was in previous seasons. And another hard thing for me to swallow right about now is I don't think that there's going to be some second move coming. Like I said, if this was the setup trade to another move, I do think we might have already seen that by now. I know it's only been a couple days. There's still plenty of offseason left, but for anybody saying, oh, this puts us in a better position to grab a Trey Murphy, or maybe Portland still wants to dump some of their guards and move on to some of their draft picks there, and now we have extra picks to play with. But I can't get behind that. It just feels like the priority number one was dumping Jaylen Brown, so I'm not super confident that there is going to be a second deal that is related to this one. So putting a bow on the Celtics side of things in this deal, I fucking hate it. I hate the fact that it was Philadelphia. I hate the fact that we didn't get more flexible contracts in return, any sort of young assets that have real upside to them. Sure, Paul George can be a nice rotation piece for the next 2 years, but beyond that, I don't even know if I want to re-sign him. I mean, maybe we can go full aspiration and somehow convince Paul George to decline his $56 million player option for the following season, and maybe we can re-sign him to a more team-friendly deal for a couple seasons beyond that, but I'm not in love with the idea of financially being committed to Paul George into his 40s with how unreliable the guy's been throughout his entire 30s. And even if we were to do some shady under-the-table shit, I don't even know if that's enough to get the guy to decline $56 million for one season when the dude's going to be like 38 or something like that. So I think that this is truly a nightmare. Obviously, there's a world where the Celtics are still a better team next year, so I'm not totally going scorched earth. It's hard to with how much success the team has had lately. And yes, those picks could end up being really valuable. And yes, maybe we end up packaging those picks into something more desirable down the road. But in a vacuum, I mean, this is just horrible process for the Celtics to act like we were the team without any leverage in this situation. The fact that we couldn't just apologize to Jaylen Brown, check ball with the same team we had last year, adding Jason Tatum and Mitchell Robinson into that mix. And even if that doesn't make us a title favorite, it certainly would put us in the mix to win the Eastern Conference next year. I don't think there's any way you can argue against that. And now even that's up in the air because I think the team is worse. As I pivot and quickly talk about what this means for the Philadelphia 76ers, Jaylen Brown ends up joining a projected starting lineup with Tyrese Maxey, VJ Edgecombe, Dean Wade, who they just signed in free agency, and Joel Embiid. I love the pickup for Philly. I think it's a swing that makes a ton of sense, especially when you consider you're getting off of that Paul George contract. Now, admittedly, the fit with Joel Embiid and Jaylen Brown, that's pretty clunky. Both those guys like to have the ball in their hands. They both like to operate in the mid-range. I'm sure that those guys don't like each other from years of facing up against each other in the playoffs, but obviously when Philadelphia is making any move moving forward, they're not thinking about Joel Embiid. They're thinking about Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe being the foundation of the team. And the fit with Jaylen Brown and those guys, I don't know if it's necessarily the best, but it's certainly much better than what it is with Joel Embiid. At least Jaylen Brown, his physicality, how great of an athlete he is, it's going to pair really nicely with the pace that Maxey and Edgecombe want to play with. They're going to be able to get downhill. They're going to be able to score the ball. And at the very least, even when Joel Embiid misses games, having that big three of Maxey, Edgecombe, and Jaylen Brown, that's going to be a really good regular season team, so they should be able to tread water. They should be able to at least secure a top 5 seed in the East, even when they run into injury issues. So I think Philly's a lot better from this deal. I'm not taking them serious as an actual threat to win the title, because I think that would require Joel Embiid staying healthy for a full playoff run, and I'm certainly not going to bet on that. I don't know how you possibly can, and especially with the lack of backup bigs that they have in Philadelphia right now, there's no way that they're able to win in the playoffs without Joel Embiid, so I'm still not taking them that seriously, but they're certainly better after making this move. I could easily see this team as a top 3 seed. I mean, there is a world where the personalities don't mesh, and maybe they don't have the right coach for the job, and maybe things do end up turning a little bit nasty if Jaylen Brown wants his extension as soon as possible, but the reality is, Philadelphia should have the leverage. They should be able to just play it out with Jaylen Brown for at least the next 2 seasons. They don't need to give him that extension if they don't want to. Even if they don't end up extending Jaylen Brown beyond his current contract, I think 2 first-round picks and getting off Paul George makes this deal worth it, even if you're just renting Jaylen Brown for the next 3 seasons. So I think that covers it. I probably could have done another 40 minutes on this trade alone, just unpacking it from every angle, but this sucks. I absolutely hate it. I acknowledge there's a world in which it ends up working out for the Celtics because Brad Stevens already has a really great foundation in place. You already have a franchise player in Jason Tatum, and maybe they can make it work around the fringes, building out the rest of this roster in this new second apron salary cap era, whatever. But in the short term, this is nearly impossible to stomach. I think Philadelphia comes out the better team. The price that they paid is completely reasonable. And it's just so hard to wrap your mind around the fact that the Celtics were so desperate to trade Jaylen Brown, despite having him under contract, that they felt the need to take a really underwhelming package on the first day of free agency. I really hope that there's more that comes out about this story, but the way the Celtics like to keep things close to the vest, I'm not even sure the fans are going to get the explanation for this trade that they deserve, and that might be the worst part of all of this. So let's keep it moving to some other trades that don't make me want to blow my head off. Starting off with the deal that sends Ja Morant to Portland. Memphis decides to close the book on Ja Morant. They trade him to the Portland Trailblazers in exchange for Jeremy Grant and Chris Murray, and apparently the Grizzlies had to include $1 million in cash just to give the Blazers the extra incentive to take on Ja Morant. To give you guys the contract perspective, I think that that's important to include in basically all these deals. Ja Morant has 2 years with basically $44 million a year left on his current deal. And Jeremy Grant, the main contract that the Grizzlies got back in return, is also on a not so great contract. He's on track to make $34 million next year and $36 million on a player option the season after that. So obviously Portland is able to pick up Ja Morant for basically nothing, right? Literally a complete free swing on Ja Morant, because I'm assuming the Blazers also wanted to get Jeremy Grant off their books. They also get a little bit of extra cash on hand as well. But what the fuck are you doing if you're the Portland Trailblazers? I just don't understand. You obviously value Scoot Henderson and maybe even Shaedon Sharpe as well. You value those guys enough to not trade them for Giannis, to not trade them for Jaylen Brown. But as the roster is currently constructed, you're still making both of those young players play behind Damian Lillard, play behind Ja Morant, play behind Drew Holiday and Denny Advia, who even though he's not a guard is a very ball-dominant player in his own right. How do you not dump at least 1 or 2 of these guards within the next couple of months? And with the way that the Blazers have structured these moves, it feels like Ja Morant is not going anywhere else. There's obviously no market for the guy. Damian Lillard, you brought him back after the Achilles tear. He's definitely going to be on the team. Drew Holiday is still a really valuable player, but he's making a ton of money himself. So I don't see a ton of teams lining up to take Drew. And Denny Avdia is supposed to be your franchise guy, at least on paper, right about now. So it does feel like Portland is pretty tied to this team. And even though they got Morant for free, I just don't understand what they're building. Like, this is getting real personal now. I just cannot wait to hate watch the Blazers. I already hated watching them, and I do like Dame Lillard, but I can't stand watching Denny Avdia. I cannot stand Donovan Clingan stomp around on a basketball court. And now you're adding maybe my least favorite player in the entire NBA and Ja Morant to that team. Like, I will definitely be tuned in a lot on League Pass. I cannot stand watching those guys. It's just going to be really frustrating. I don't think this makes Portland a better team. I think, if anything, there's just too many cooks in the kitchen. And even though they have some young players that might continue to develop, like maybe Denny gets even better, maybe Clingan takes a step up, maybe Sharp and Scoot elevate a little bit despite the situation that they're in. But even if you include the best case scenario for those guys, I think Portland's worse after making this move. It's just too many cooks in the kitchen. I don't understand how the offense is going to function. You're going to have some real defensive concerns with Damian Lillard and Ja Morant seeming to be keepers on this roster. Like, how do those two guys play together? How much do they have left coming off of some pretty significant injuries for both of those guys? I just don't understand it for Portland. I know it's free, but unless there's a second move that comes and a significant deal that maybe they get really great value for Scoot and Sharp, I just feel like if you care about those guys' development, I would just trade them because they're not going to thrive in the situation that they're currently in Portland. And those players, because they are still young, should have some value to other teams across the NBA. So I just don't understand it from Portland's perspective at all. I get it for Memphis. I totally understand why they'd want to turn the page on Ja Morant. They're going into a new era of Grizzlies basketball, mainly built around Cam Boozer at this point in time. They ultimately got a really great return for Jaren Jackson Jr. and for Desmond Bane, so that makes the really underwhelming return that they got for Ja Morant a bit more palatable. But at the same time, I can't just go out and just praise Memphis for finding a suitor to get rid of Ja Morant. They got absolutely nothing for him. Maybe there's some slight financial benefits to getting off of Ja Morant's contract, but at the same time, you're getting back that really bad contract from Jeremy Grant too. So I can't give it a 10 out of 10 for Memphis, but if I had to pick a side, I certainly like it more from the Grizzlies' perspective. Keeping it moving, another blockbuster trade that we have to talk about. Kawhi Leonard is a Toronto Raptor once again. This one was pretty surprising, even though there was some smoke that the Raptors were interested in reuniting with Kawhi the previous few days. In this deal, the Raptors received Kawhi Leonard, and in return, the Clippers received Brandon Ingram, Grady Dick, unprotected first-round picks of the Raptors in 2031 and 2033, a couple second-round picks, and then a first-round swap in 2027. So, to give you guys a contract perspective, Kawhi Leonard is on the books for $50 million this year, and then he's set to hit unrestricted free agency. To my knowledge, he has not yet signed an extension with the Raptors, but that's basically a certainty. You don't make this move if you're the Toronto Raptors if you don't have at least some assurance that Kawhi is going to sign a longer-term extension with the team. The main contract that the Clippers are getting back is Brandon Ingram, who had a pretty solid regular season. I think he actually somehow snuck into the All-Star game in the Eastern Conference, which, again, I think the All-Star team in the East this year was just a nightmare with some of the selections that were made. But whatever, he's on the books for $40 million this year, and then he has a $42 million player option that I think it's pretty likely that he will end up picking up. So not necessarily a home run for the Clippers because you don't love that Ingram contract, but they need somebody to pay. They need somebody to go out there that is proven on a largely unproven roster. So I guess I can understand that. But ultimately on this deal, I think I kind of like it for both sides. I don't feel too strongly one way or the other. Starting with Toronto and their decision to make this bet on Kawhi Leonard, it is really funny. Obviously, they traded basically nothing for Kawhi Leonard all the way back in 2019 because there was uncertainty if he was going to be willing to sign with whatever team traded for him. And they basically got him for DeMar DeRozan. I think Jakob Poeltl was in there too, and maybe they threw in one pick that wasn't super valuable. And then you look at what the Raptors had to give up to get him now when he's 35 years old in 2026, and they pay even more for Kawhi Leonard. So I guess the optics of that are pretty funny, but I do understand it from the Raptors' perspective. I mean, they were basically in no man's land. I was really down on the Raptors. I should give them more credit because they fought pretty hard against the Cavs, and maybe if Emmanuel Quickley was healthy and Brandon Ingram was more healthy in that series, and they could have actually ended up beating the Cavs in round one. But they desperately needed somebody to be a star player, at least on the offensive end of the court, and I think Kawhi Leonard fills that nicely. I mean, obviously, the caveat with Kawhi Leonard is always if he plays, if he stays healthy, but when he does, I think it's pretty hard to argue he's anything but a top 10 player in the NBA. The defense, yeah, that's come down a little bit in recent years now that he's a little bit older, but when he wants to be, he's still an elite defender. I think that front court of him and Scotty Barnes and Colin Murray-Boyles, who had some real flashes as a rookie, is just terrifying to play against. They're going to be so tough defensively. That should really scare some other teams in the Eastern Conference. And I think for Scotty Barnes and his development, it pushes him to a much more natural role as like your secondary playmaker on offense if you do have Kawhi Leonard out there and all the additive stuff that Scotty Barnes is so good at. I think he's going to be able to shine in that role a little bit more because he was definitely overtasked to be like their primary offensive creator most of the time for the Raptors last season. So I think it's a big risk because obviously Kawhi Leonard, not just his injury issues, but also like, are we really sure he's going to want to be there the whole time, even if he signs that extension with Toronto? He didn't seem to be happy to just stay with the Raptors even after they won in 2019 and actually could have been a really good team the next couple years. I think that 2019 team came out of nowhere because nobody was expecting Golden State to lose when they had Kevin Durant on an already loaded team. But once those injuries shook out the way they did in that 2019 finals and the Raptors won, I think that they definitely would have been an even more formidable team the following years, right? Because once Golden State, they fell apart after that 2019 season with all the injuries and Kevin Durant leaving. I think the Raptors could have had like a nice little 2 to 3 year run right there. But Kawhi Leonard obviously made the decision to go to the Clippers, and we know the aspiration stuff that came along with that. So it is risky to get into business with Kawhi Leonard, but I can certainly see the upside in doing it for a team in Toronto that probably wasn't going to make any noise anyway. And then on the Clippers side of things, I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think that they would want to move on from Kawhi Leonard. I think he's had a pretty rocky tenure in Los Angeles, to say the least. And even if you had Kawhi Leonard on your team, like they've shipped out the rest of the roster, like they no longer had Paul George, they no longer had James Harden, they no longer had Zubac. Like that team wasn't going to win anything, even if Kawhi Leonard somehow played 82 games. So he wasn't going to be a long-term guy for them, and I think they really did a great job of maximizing the return, getting a couple unprotected first-round picks in 2031 and 2033, and that's far enough out where, like, yeah, it's going to take a while for those to convey, but even if you like the young core that the Raptors have in place, it could look totally different by the time 2030, 2031 rolls around. So the Clips aren't necessarily in a great spot still, but I think it's nice that they finally have a direction. They have a young team. It's mostly bad. It's mostly unproven, right? And they are in a tough spot because it looks like their 27 pick, so their pick next year might get swapped to OKC. You have their 28 pick that's probably going to end up heading to Boston at this point in time. But if they can survive the next 2 years without coughing up a really high lottery pick, I mean, that would just be a real kick in the balls for the team. If they are really bad and don't even get rewarded with their own pick, if they're able to survive the next couple of years, then the future starts to look a little bit brighter because then they start to have control of their own picks again, and they have the picks that they've recouped with this Kawhi Leonard trade. So overall, I see it for both sides, and I think it's a pretty fascinating swing for the Toronto Raptors, who are suddenly a lot scarier than what they were last week. Keeping it moving, I wanted to talk about the Los Angeles Lakers because they made a flurry of moves on July 1st, all in a span of like basically 30 minutes. And the biggest swing that they made, and they had a lot of eyes on them, it is worth noting that LeBron James told the Lakers that he is not going to be re-signing with the team. He is officially an unrestricted free agent. So that news broke on June 30th. We are going to talk about LeBron and his potential destinations right after this. But let's start off with the Lakers and how they decided to fill out the rest of this roster. The biggest swing that they made was trading for Walker Kessler of the Utah Jazz. And to make that deal happen, the Lakers had to give up unprotected first-round picks in 2031 and 2033, and then 2 extra first-round pick swaps in 2028 and 2030. And subsequently, once that deal was complete, Walker Kessler immediately signed a 4-year, $130 million contract with the Lakers. I think this deal in a vacuum is a home run for the Jazz. I think they really maximize the return of a young player that could turn into being an elite center in the NBA for sure, but he also just hasn't proven it yet, has a lot of injury concerns. So I think this is a massive risk for the Lakers. And I do have to give you guys the picture of what their other moves are. Right after the Walker Kessler trade and extension, they signed Quentin Grimes to a 4-year, $60 million contract. They signed Sandro Mamushvili or something like that. They signed Mamu for a 4-year, $52 million contract. And then they also signed Colin Sexton to a 2-year, $19 million contract. And then the last move that they made actually just took place a couple hours ago. They basically salary dumped DeAndre Ayton. Ayton ended up picking up his $8 million player option for this season, and then they ended up shipping him out to Washington. In return, they received Jaden Hardy and a couple second-round picks. So that's basically a salary dump of DeAndre Ayton. Maybe the Lakers have a little bit more flexibility now that he's off the team, but they also have a hole in the backup center spot that they're going to need to fill in free agency. So in a vacuum, this Lakers team looks totally different. You no longer have LeBron. You no longer have Marcus Smart. He ended up signing with the Rockets that we'll talk about here in a bit. It looks like Rui Hachimura is going to be gone. Luke Kennard signed with the Suns. He's gone. So basically the team that beat the Rockets in the first round of the playoffs, especially when you consider that Austin Reeves and Luka basically weren't playing at that point. See, that team is completely gone. It is a completely different set of guys. And while I do think the Lakers are better in a vacuum than what they were last year when you total up all of these moves, I don't think I like this swing. I don't think I like this offseason for the Lakers at all. I mean, they basically have no tradable picks that have any sort of value moving forward. I guess now that they have a couple more seconds to play with after this most recent DeAndre Ayton moves. But all of their picks are either already traded out or are in that potential swap with Utah in the Walker Kessler deal. So they really don't have any valuable picks to attach in any future moves. And they basically used up all their cap space on the 4 guys I just named. Again, those guys being Kessler, Grimes, Mamu, and Sexton. All the cap space for the Lakers is basically gone. So the core is basically in place with this team. Their starting lineup is extremely white, to be totally honest with you. You have Luka, you have Austin Reeves. I guess you expect Quentin Grimes to start based on the contract figure there. Maybe you bring him off the bench as well, so you don't have a ton of size there. And then filling out the starting lineup, you have Mamu and Walker Kessler. So yes, I do think the Lakers are better. I think the team makes a little bit more sense than what it did last year, even with LeBron really embracing his role for a couple months there as the third option. Yes, the team has a little bit more interior defense and a little bit more shooting around Luka and Austin Reeves, but the real question is this enough? Is this enough to build a team around Luka Doncic that can ultimately contend for an NBA title? And I think for the most part, the answer is no. I mean, the Lakers are going to be a really good team, assuming that everybody stays healthy, but I don't think that they are on the same tier as an Oklahoma City, as a San Antonio, or maybe even as a Denver. I know Denver has a lot of work to do this offseason, but I kind of give the benefit of the doubt to Jokic and what we've seen from him. So yeah, even though they should be basically a lock to finish as a top 6 seed in the West with top 3 upside, I don't really see a world in which the Lakers are a real threat to win the NBA title unless Luka just goes completely nuclear. Maybe he ends up being the best player in the world. I think he does have that ceiling. Maybe he can have his best year yet, get into good shape, stay in good shape, hold up a little bit better on the defensive end of the court and put up the same eye-popping numbers that we're used to on offense. But you need Luka to be that good, and you need Walker Kessler to really hit. And I just don't know if I'm making that bet if I'm the Los Angeles Lakers. And to spend a little bit more time on Kessler, like, he's really just like a theoretical player right about now. I mean, he's huge. He's a phenomenal rim protector. He did show signs last season of being able to shoot the 3 ball, certainly more so than previous years. He shot the ball really well during the first couple games of the year, but it's worth noting he literally only played 5 games last season, and then he injured his shoulder. The Jazz ended up shutting him down for the season, and he's struggled with this shoulder issue since he's entered the NBA. So he is a massive injury risk. I think defensively it makes a ton of sense. He's obviously an upgrade on that end of the court over DeAndre Ayton. He should make up for a lot of the defensive shortcomings that the Lakers are going to run into by having Austin Reeves and Luka on the court at the same time. But I think offensively, there's a lot of question marks with Walker Kessler. We don't know if that 3-point jump shot is going to be reliable enough to hold up on more volume, and especially over the span of a full season. And even with what we know about him as like a screener, as a roller, as a lob threat, like, he's fine. Like, he's a big body, and him going from playing with Keontae George to playing with Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves, like, his life is getting so much easier. So it's not going to take much for him to thrive in that role of just like catching and dunking. But he really hasn't been that polished in that area either. He hasn't played in any big games in Utah. He hasn't been able to stay healthy for a full season throughout his entire career. And honestly, like, on the offensive end of the court, DeAndre Ayton might actually be like a tad better than Walker Kessler with what we've seen from both of those guys through this point in their careers. So it is just a massive risk. I think the Kessler move is the worst one of all of them because it's such a big swing. Now, if it hits, maybe I'll be looking really dumb, because there is a world where I could see him becoming like a top 5 or a top 10 center in the NBA, but they just traded for him like he already is that, and they paid him like he already is that when the jury is still out. And I think the injury concerns for a guy of that size can't be overstated. So I don't want to be too critical because ultimately I think that they were in a tough spot. They needed to use this cap space. I don't think there was a way to build a cookie cutter team around Luka when they really didn't have any homegrown guys in the building that were on favorable contracts that already fit that mold. So they basically just had to go out hunting for the rest of the guys to fill out the roster. And there really weren't many paths for them to get on that top tier. But I think for a team that just basically put in all of its chips on this current team, they don't have any picks left. They don't have a ton of cap space left. I just don't think that it's going to be enough. And so I think it's pretty sad the way this is shaken out for Luka Doncic. And I don't see a world in which they actually contend unless, again, Walker Kessler ends up being an absolute hit and Luka ends up being the best player in the world. So final bit of headliner news before we talk about all the other trades and free agency signings. We got to spend a little bit of time on LeBron here because, again, he did tell the Lakers on June 30th that he is not going to be re-signing with the team. So we're heading toward another situation like we were with the decision in 2010 where 29 teams around the NBA are now trying to recruit LeBron James. It is worth noting that he told the Lakers on June 30th, which was exactly one day after his son Bronny James's contract with the Lakers for this upcoming season became guaranteed. So now the Lakers have to spend like $2.3 million to keep Bronny on the roster for this season. Another calculated move from LeBron's camp just to make sure his son was in a decent spot before he told the Lakers, I'm out of here. I kind of respect that move. I think it's pretty funny. You made the team draft your son. You made him stick around on the roster the past couple seasons. You might as well see it out and make sure he sticks around so it didn't end up being embarrassing if LeBron said he was leaving and then immediately the Lakers like released Bronny. I don't know if they would have done that anyway, but nice little good dad move for LeBron on the way out the door. So where does that leave LeBron in his free agency decision and all the other teams recruiting him? It's really difficult to get into the mind of LeBron James. He's obviously really calculated. I don't know what the guy is chasing at this point in his career, right? Obviously, he's still a really talented player. I think he was genuinely super impressive in the playoffs, especially in that first round against the Rockets, basically single-handedly dragging the Lakers to a first-round win, even though the Rockets were kind of a disaster and we're missing Kevin Durant for the most part in that series. And even against the Thunder, like LeBron James, I think played great. That was obviously a miserable matchup on paper. So I don't know what he's looking to do at this point in his career. He basically has every significant counting stat with how long this guy's been in the NBA. So I don't know if he needs to push the boundary any further there. But I don't blame him for still wanting to play basketball because he is still really productive as a player. So I think it comes down to 5 teams for LeBron James right about now. I'd be pretty shocked if he goes to any team besides this 5. I think the Warriors, when he announced that he was leaving the Lakers, ended up immediately slotting in as like the clubhouse leader to land LeBron. There's been rumors that because Draymond opted out of his player option, that he was doing that to open up more flexibility for the Warriors to sign LeBron James. There's also been rumors that the Warriors are very interested in trading for Anthony Davis. Jimmy Butler would probably be in that deal, but if they were somehow able to pull that off, that would lead to a lineup with Steph Curry, LeBron James, Draymond Green, Anthony Davis. You still have Porzingis there, and some other interesting pieces off the Warriors bench. So that would be like an expendable situation where all the old guys get together, one last run. I mean, obviously LeBron and Steph have a pretty good relationship, and they seem to really enjoy playing together during the Olympics. So I think Golden State would make a lot of sense, even if they were able to sign LeBron and pull off that Anthony Davis trade. Like, that's just such a terrible health bet with all those guys being that old and being able to survive in a long regular season in a really tough conference. So I wouldn't predict them to be a top 4 seed in the West, even if they were able to pull off that team. But I do think that Golden State could make a lot of sense. I think the other line of thinking for LeBron, if he doesn't go to Golden State, is like maybe he would look for a reunion of one of his previous teams. I just don't know how eager he is to add a 4th team that he's played for, because obviously this guy really cares about the optics of his entire career, and he's clearly trying to build up his case as like the greatest of all time. So I do feel like a return to Cleveland or Miami, even though it doesn't make the most basketball sense, he might just do that from like a nostalgia perspective. I think Cleveland makes a little bit more sense than Miami for that reason, because obviously that's where he's from. But basketball-wise, I don't think it makes a ton of sense. I think the fit with him and James Harden is really clunky, and all signs are pointing to Harden signing a long-term extension with Cleveland. So I don't think LeBron would be in a rush to do that. And yeah, Miami, like obviously they're trying to fill out the rest of their team alongside Giannis and Bam, and they could really use LeBron, but I don't know how eager he is to be second fiddle to Giannis on his first season with a new team after they just went out and gutted the rest of the roster just to bring Giannis in. I don't think Miami would be the best basketball situation either, so those two fits aren't perfect. And then you move on to the last line of thought for LeBron James, which would be, I want to get a 5th ring at all costs. And I think the 2 landing spots he would reasonably go to maximize those chances of winning a ring would be San Antonio and Denver. San Antonio, obviously, they got real close last year. I mean, Wemby's trajectory is just ridiculous. I think they've had a really good offseason so far. So you add LeBron James to the mix. He's clearly the calming veteran presence that team would need. It would make a lot of basketball sense, and they would immediately be the favorites to win the title, because I think they might already be that. And then you look at Denver, a team that's been in the mix the past couple years, has maybe the best player in the world in Jokic, somebody that'd be really fun to play next to. Obviously, they have a lot of work to do to fill out the rest of their roster, so I could see LeBron going there and maybe shifting odds in the favor of Denver coming out the West. That has to be on the table. I just don't know how egregious LeBron is willing to get when it comes to ring chasing, right? Like, he has to know if he signs with San Antonio, if he signs with Denver, where he's clearly the second fiddle to 2 of the best players in the entire world, what the optics of that would be. And I don't know if he would be willing to deal with all that, right? Even if he wins a 5th ring with San Antonio, with Denver, depending on how that run ends up shaking out, there would be no shortage of people quickly looking to diminish that accomplishment because LeBron is joining a really established team already. But any team outside of those five, I don't know if there's enough of a basketball fit. I don't know if there's enough of a chance where he's going to win the title outside of these five. So I feel pretty good about him landing with one of those options. I don't think there's an overwhelming favorite. If I really had to pick, I'd still probably say Golden State because I think he cares more about having fun and playing with Steph Curry and doing something really unique from a basketball perspective the last couple years. Like, I feel like that would be the most appealing to him. But again, putting myself in the head of LeBron James is going to be difficult. So we're just going to have to wait and see where he ends up landing. And it does seem like he's going to take his time with this. I don't expect LeBron to make a decision until later in the offseason. I think he enjoys the attention that's going to be on him. He enjoys that this is a talking point. And he probably enjoys getting recruited by about 29 teams right about now. So I'm not expecting this story to end anytime soon. Now let's move on and talk about all the other trades that have taken place over the past week. I know I just went really in depth on the first couple moves on this podcast, so we'll try to pick it up, do a little bit of rapid fire here. I think the most notable deal that we haven't already discussed took place a couple days ago between the Hornets and the Suns. In this deal, the Hornets received Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, and a 2033 Suns first-round pick. And in return, the Suns received Miles Bridges, a 2029 Hornets first-round pick, and a 2027 second-round pick. So the bones of it is Miles Bridges going to Phoenix for Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal, and I think Charlotte wins the draft capital exchange right there as well. I love this move for Charlotte. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it makes the LaMelo deal a lot more understandable when you look at Charlotte from the perspective of just trying to get the immature guys out of the room. I mean, regardless of what you think of LaMelo Ball, clearly there were some personality concerns with how locked in that guy was. I did notice that when LaMelo got traded, Miles Bridges posted this big, long thing on social media about how LaMelo was his brother and his best friend. And the fact that those two get along so well almost makes it more of a red flag for LaMelo. And then immediately Charlotte decides to ship out Miles Bridges as well. I think that they have guys that are a little bit more bought in with the locker room, a little bit easier to coach. Because by all accounts, even though Miles Bridges is brilliantly talented, he's a bad dude. You can tell there's been some really damning off-the-court allegations of domestic violence that I guess were resolved and he was never really punished for from an NBA perspective, but it's still a terrible look and not somebody teams should be excited about bringing into the locker room. So when you look at the basketball side of things for Charlotte, you add a lot of depth, you add really good three-point shooters in Grayson Allen and Royce O'Neal that were two guys that were really great role players for a Suns team that overachieved last year. And those guys should slot in nicely, both coming off the bench. It also allows Naz Reid to play the starting four in place of Miles Bridges. So the Hornets starting lineup is now Kobe White, Con Knuppel, Brandon Miller, Naz Reid, and Moussa Diabate. I think that starting five makes a lot of sense on paper, and now the bench looks a lot better. And Charlotte's just doing a lot of smart moves here. They're adding draft capital. I'd much rather have a 2033 Phoenix first-round pick rather than the Hornets' own pick in 2029. I think it's pretty safe to assume the Hornets should at least be decent during the 2028 season, so I like that draft capital exchange. And then when you look at it from Phoenix's perspective, like, I guess I get it on paper if you're in 2K and you're just trying to build the best starting lineup possible. Like, sure, Bridges slots in nicely at the four. They didn't really have anybody to play that spot. The lineup on paper of Devin Booker, Jalen Green, Dylan Brooks, Miles Bridges, and Mark Williams, like, yeah, that's kind of desirable on paper. But now you have less of a bench. You're losing a lot of three-point shooting. And again, I just would not be in a rush to add Miles Bridges to my locker room, even though he has been a pretty productive player the past few seasons in the NBA. So I don't really know why you're doing this. If you're Phoenix, I wouldn't be in a rush to give away another one of my picks as well. And what is this team really going to achieve? Even if that somehow makes them better for this upcoming season, I just don't think this team is really going anywhere. If I had to pick a team to regress, the Suns would be my number one overall choice. I don't think that they are able to have the same record that they did last season, even after this Bridges trade. And again, I just don't like the idea of Phoenix losing that draft capital exchange as well. So I think that's a really great deal for the Hornets. I don't know if I still would have given away LaMelo Ball for that price, but when you look at the net of both of the trades that the Hornets made, I think it makes a lot more sense. Rapid fire on some other trades here. The Memphis Grizzlies traded Santi Aldama to the Dallas Mavericks in exchange for AJ Johnson and a heavily protected 2030 first-round pick, as well as 2 second-round picks. The pick is pretty heavily protected, so I think it's a fine swing for the Mavericks at, I think it's like top 20 protected or something like that. So you're looking at a late first-round pick and a couple seconds for Santi Aldama, who is a pretty good shooter, who has a lot of size to him, even though he plays like more of a wing. So I guess it's a fine swing for the Mavericks. I don't have that strong of an opinion on it, but at the same time, you have Cooper Flagg, you still have PJ Washington under contract, you drafted Morez Johnson in the first round. I just don't know if this commitment of assets to improve the wing position when I wouldn't feel good about my guard depth or my big man depth if I'm the Dallas Mavericks. And it also makes sense that Memphis would want to add more draft capital just by giving away Aldama. Nice little pickup for the Pistons. They were able to acquire John Collins in a sign-and-trade. So John Collins is now under contract for 3 years, $51 million in Detroit. I feel like John Collins reminds me a bit of DeAndre Ayton, where on paper he looks really good, still has great size and is a phenomenal athlete, but he always leaves you wanting more. I don't think any of the teams that John Collins has been on during his NBA career were thrilled with his production versus expectation. But I think we know what he is at this point in the NBA. He was a 40% three-point shooter this past year on decent volume. So at the very least, if he can do that again for Detroit, they should be able to improve their floor spacing. I'm assuming he's going to take Tobias Harris' spot in the starting lineup. So maybe he can space the floor and be a nice little lob threat for Detroit. And earlier today, we had the Houston Rockets basically salary dumping Dorian Finney-Smith to the Charlotte Hornets. And in exchange, the Hornets picked up 3 second-round picks just to take on Dorian Finney-Smith's contract. DFS is set to make $13 million a year the next couple seasons, so it is a pretty bad contract. He was a nice player when he was in Dallas and Brooklyn and even with the Lakers, but for whatever reason, it looks like Dorian Finney-Smith was basically washed last year. He couldn't get on the court for that Rockets team that was pretty deep, but was not very productive, was not as good of a shooter last year, so I don't see him playing a ton of minutes in Charlotte, but they had the cap space to take it on, and I guess they valued what could be a 3-and-D player and picking up some additional second-round picks. Let's keep it pushing to rapid fire all the other free agent signings and extensions, starting off with a couple deals that we had all the way back on June 26th. Jaylen Clark signed a 3-year, $10 million extension with the Timberwolves. Nice little extension for an energy player and a good defender for the Timberwolves, so I like that signing. The Thunder were able to re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein to a 3-year, $75 million contract, so I think that is awesome value for Isaiah Hartenstein. $25 million a year. He had an awesome playoffs. He was really important and their best defender on Victor Wembanyama in that matchup against San Antonio. The floater seemed to be falling at a pretty good clip. That was a nice little bailout source of offense for the Thunder as well. So Hartenstein is huge for them. And now they are basically locked into their front court rotation over the next couple years. Hartenstein's under contract. Chet's under contract. The other Jalen Williams is under contract. And they also drafted Mara in the first round as well. So I really like that signing for OKC, one of the best moves of the offseason. Moving on to all the deals that took place on June 30th. Starting off, we had Zach LaVine opting into his $50 million player option with the Sacramento Kings. Who could have foreseen that coming? Just a nightmare contract for the Kings. Fred VanVleet should be back and healthy for the Rockets this year, and he opted into his $25 million player option. So I guess we're going to find out how valuable Fred VanVleet is to the Rockets. If he can right all the wrongs that the Rockets had going for them last year, we'll have to find out. Kristaps Porzingis signed a 2-year, $40 million extension to stay in Golden State. It's a big price tag for Porzingis, who still never plays, but the upside of having a guy at his size that can shoot the ball and protect the rim, you knew he was going to get a payday somewhere. $20 million a year is still really high, but at least it's a short-term commitment lengthwise, but he's going to be a warrior in all likelihood the next couple years. So I think it's fine for Golden State. I just wouldn't bet him playing any more than 45 games. I feel like that's where I'd set the over-under for Porzingis. And honestly, I'd probably take the under on that, even though I really like him as a player. Nurkic, in the wake of the Walker Kessler trade to the Lakers, he re-signed with Utah for 2 years, $22 million. So that's fine value for Nurkic. He seems to be pretty productive in Utah. He's a pretty flawed player. He's not great defensively, but he does put up stats. He fills up the box score, and he'll hold down solid minutes for the Utah Jazz team as they look to build around the young core that they have in place. So I think that's a fine move. A move I didn't like so much, Jock Landale re-signs with the Hawks, 1 year, $14 million. I mean, $14 million for Jock Landale, that's pretty high. I know he's a big man that can space the floor a little bit. He can shoot the ball well, but that just felt like a lot of money. But what do I know? Rob Williams, back in Portland, 3 years, $44 million. I was bummed. I was hoping to sign Rob Williams. I had fully talked myself into what I saw from Rob Williams in that first round playoff series against the Spurs. He was awesome. When he plays, he's still an unbelievable lob threat, rim protector. I just love Rob Williams. Again, he's just like Porzingis, just a terrible health bet, but I think that's fine value. I'm happy to see that guy get another payday. We'll see how many games he plays next year. Harrison Barnes returns to the San Antonio Spurs, 1 year, $8 million. So he does take a more team-friendly deal. That's still a little high for Harrison Barnes, but I'm sure the Spurs were happy to keep him around just for the presence in the locker room, having another vet that they're able to keep in the building. Kevin Huerter got a 3-year, $27 million contract to return to the Detroit Pistons. I felt like this was a little high for Kevin Huerter. I mean, you'll always take a shooter for less than $10 million a year. Like, I guess that's fine. But Huerter really was out of the rotation by the time the playoffs came around. So I don't know why they felt the need to keep Huerter at that price point when you still have Duncan Robinson and some other guys that can shoot the ball. But whatever, they decided to re-sign Huerter. Julian Champagnie stays in San Antonio on a 3-year, $45 million contract. I think this guy definitely earned that payday. He was one of the best contracts in the NBA this past season. Held it down as like a starting power forward for the San Antonio Spurs this past season. Great shooter. Definitely deserved that contract. Plays a lot bigger than what he is. And even though he actually will probably play less this upcoming season, it is nice to see him get that payday. Curious move here. The Thunder picked up Lu Dort's team option for 1 year and $17 million for this upcoming season. I thought that was pretty puzzling, especially after they basically dumped Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe. I thought that they would be more willing to move on from Lu Dort as well, because apparently Cason Wallace is up for a contract extension, and there's been mumblings that he might be on the move. I think the Thunder should do everything they possibly can to retain Cason Wallace, and I think Lu Dort is basically expendable at this point. So I don't think a trade is like guaranteed, and maybe they'll just keep Lu Dort heading into the season and heading into the trade deadline, because $17 million on an expiring contract is really tradable. So maybe they just like to have the flexibility, and you know what Lu Dort is. He's going to give you good defense and hot and cold shooting. So I thought that was curious from the Thunder, but we'll see if there's another move to come there. That wouldn't be too surprising. Landry Shamet staying in New York, 4 years, $24 million, earned that payday with his ridiculous shooting in the postseason, so I'm sure he's happy to have a home, get a little bit more money. Luke Kennard going to Phoenix, 2 years, $13 million, played nice for the Lakers last year, so that is nice that the Suns are able to recoup the loss of Grayson Allen. You bring in Luke Kennard, another great shooter. That definitely helps improve the bench unit for Phoenix quite a bit. Zach Collins stays in Chicago, 2 years, $17 million. I think that's a little high. The guy doesn't really seem to play that much, and when he does play, I don't think he's that special, but whatever. Keeping it moving to all the moves that happened on July 1st. We got a long list of them here. Marcus Smart going to Houston, 2 years, $13 million. Reunites with Ime Udoka. I like that signing. You know he's going to play a ton because Ime is going to be addicted to the defensive energy and identity that Marcus Smart brings, so I think that that's a nice little signing. Bogdan Bogdanovic also signing a contract with the Rockets, giving them some shooting at 1 year's $4 million. Nice little signing there. Dean Wade, mentioned it earlier, but he's going to Philadelphia on a 4-year, $39 million contract. I don't know if I love that. That feels a little high for Dean Wade. Theoretically, he is a nice wing defender. He does bring some size. He brings some shooting, but like offensively, beyond the shooting, I think he gives you basically nothing. And I feel like people keep telling me he's a good defender. Whenever I watch him, I am not blown away. Defensively, Philly should be in a pretty good spot because Maxey and Edgecombe and Jaylen Brown can all hold their own on that end of the court. So Dean Wade should fit among all those pieces and slot in nicely as a projected starting power forward for the team. I just think that's a little high for that contract. Keon Ellis, 2 years, $18 million for the Nets. Fine. I don't know what Brooklyn's doing, but whatever, that's fine value there. Jonathan Isaac, the Magic just cannot quit this guy. Finally, the massive contract that he was on is over, and so he did re-sign on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal to stay in Orlando. We'll see if he actually cracks the rotation this year. DeAnthony Melton declined his player option, but he's sticking with the Golden State Warriors. 2 years, $11 million. I think that's a fine depth piece as well. Some more notable signings we have here. Andrew Wiggins, 3 years, $64 million extension with the Heat. So $21 million a year for Andrew Wiggins. I think it's good value. I mean, Wiggins, he never really reached his potential as a player, but he won the chip in 2022. He's a solid defender. He's improved as a three-point shooter. I think he's been pretty productive in his year plus in Miami. So I like that signing. I think that's fine value for Andrew Wiggins. And he's a great athlete who hasn't really shown any signs of declining athletically yet. Maybe he will by the end of that contract, but I think for $20 million a year, that's fine. Tobias Harris signs with the San Antonio Spurs. 2 years, $31 million. All-time bag getter. Tobias Harris, just like the Kirk Cousins of the NBA, always maximizing his value. I think he's made over $330 million during his career. Just wild. So it is cool that he's able to chase a ring a little bit here in San Antonio. Maybe they end up starting him. I feel like Champagnie should deserve the nod for how productive he was for the Spurs last year to not change up their starting lineup. Besides maybe moving Harper into the starting lineup, we'll see what they do there. But I think the Spurs have a lot of options to go to in their closing five. Vassell is still under contract. You have Tobias Harris. You still have Champagnie. You have Carter Bryant. You expect him to develop a little bit. You drafted Jaden Quintons and Taurus Reed in the first round of this year's draft. So the Spurs have done a lot to add to their front court depth, and I do think Tobias Harris is a solid three-point shooter. He can give you some offensive creation because he is a really good scorer from like the low post and the mid post. So I like that signing, and I think it's fair value for San Antonio. Marvin Bagley signed a one-year deal to be a backup big in Denver. It looks like Jonas Valanciunas might be gone. He might be going back to play overseas, so they needed to do some insurance behind Jokic. And again, I'll never fully sell all my Bagley stock. I mean, I think we basically know what he is at this point, but maybe Denver can tap into something there because I think he has a lot of talent as a player. Tari Eason, significant signing here. 5 years, $81 million extension with the Rockets. Felt like this was a pretty low price for Tari Eason. Last year, he started the year shooting the ball at a ridiculous clip from three, and he's got a lot of size to him, plays with a lot of energy, he's a pretty good defender. So I think for his skill set, that is a really nice contract for the Houston Rockets. I think after he signed the deal, he tweeted like the shrugging emoji, almost suggesting that he was disappointed with his agent and the contract that he ended up getting. So I thought that was pretty funny. Don't really know what to make of it, but he definitely fits where the NBA is heading with his size, with his ability to shoot and defend. Some questions about his decision-making on offense, but I think that's well baked into the price. So that's definitely a really nice extension for the Rockets. Tyus Jones re-signed a one-year deal to be a backup point guard in Denver for dirt cheap. Kelly Oubre signed a 2-year, $17 million contract to go to the Pacers. I think that's a nice depth piece there in Indiana. Vucevic, there is absolutely no market for him. He signed a 1-year, $4 million contract to go to Orlando. He had a nice run there where he put up the best stats of his career. He really filled up the box in Orlando, and now he's going back to be a backup big to Wendell Carter. I think for that value, it's really hard to criticize that. Kind of wild to see how far the market has fallen on Vucevic. Norm Powell, relevant contract here, 2 years, $45 million to go to the Bulls. I think that's a great price for Norm Powell, how productive he's been the last couple seasons. I know he slowed down a little bit as the season went on for Miami last year, but he would have been a really nice get if the Heat were able to afford him. So that's a big loss for the Heat in free agency and desperately brings shooting, some floor spacing to a Bulls team that's really funky, has a lot of size, has a lot of young athletes, but not a lot of guys that are proven shooters. So Norm Powell should fill it up in Chicago. And then the final deal that we had on July 1st, Mo Wagner signed a 2-year, $19 million to the Nets. That's fine. Even though he's really annoying and difficult to look at, I think Mo Wagner is a nice little role player. Plays with a lot of energy, can space the floor too. So I was a little surprised that he didn't go to a better team, but I guess the Nets have to pay somebody. And then a couple other moves that took place yesterday and earlier today. We had Anthony Simons sign a 2-year, $12 million contract with the Sixers. This was just twisting the knife for me after the Jaylen Brown trade. I really enjoyed Simons' tenure as a Celtic through the first half of last season. He was an awesome spark off the bench, can really fill it up, can really shoot. Obviously, the market is down on him as a smaller guard that doesn't play a ton of defense, but I felt like $6 million a year for 2 years is just dirt cheap. I mean, there's no way he does not return positive value on that contract, and I'm really disappointed the Celtics didn't bring him back because I think there is still room in this Celtics rotation to add another guard. And I know that we're in a tough situation with the cap, but you're telling me we couldn't pull off a 2-year, $12 million contract to bring Simons back? That's really disappointing, and it's a great get for Philly. And Philly was not done there. They also signed Caleb Love to a 2-way contract, so he's going to be a Sixer next year as well. A lot of guards off the bench in Philly. You have Simons, you have Love, you have Justin Edwards, who's been a nice piece the last couple years, and you also have Phylon, who the Sixers drafted in the first round. It might be pretty tough for Phylon to get on the court with all the guys that they just signed, but they should be able to get productive guard play really no matter how Phylon shakes out. So I like both of those signings for the Sixers. So I think that covers all the free agent signings and other trades that I wanted to discuss. Obviously, as I sit here and record in the afternoon on Friday, July 3rd, a lot of moves left to be made, a lot of dominoes left to fall. Main stuff that I'm going to be watching for, LeBron, obviously his free agency decision. Anthony Davis, does he get traded? Does he work things out and actually play for the Wizards next season? Jalen Duren, a lot of weird stuff going on there. He's a restricted free agent. Felt like he was upset with a lower offer than what he was expecting from the Detroit Pistons. There was some smoke that he might sign with the Kings, and there might be a potential Sabonis trade there. I think it's most likely that he ends up in Detroit, but we're going to have to wait and see how that shakes out because clearly the two sides are apart on his value after he had a really disappointing playoff run. We have James Harden. He's pretty likely to sign an extension in Cleveland after declining his player option, so we're just kind of waiting on that news. Draymond, same type of thing, declined his player option. I expect him to stay in Golden State. Peyton Watson, he's a restricted free agent for Denver. They would really love to have him, but it'll be interesting to see if any team swoops in, makes an offer, at the very least drives up his market value a little bit. You have Rui Hachimura. He looks like he's an unrestricted free agent, and it doesn't seem like the Lakers are going to be able to afford to keep him, so I expect him to play somewhere else. Drummond is actually one of the better free agent bigs that's still available on the market. Maybe he's a fit to go back to the Lakers. Bradley Beal declined his player option. Who wants Bradley Beal? I have no idea. Bruce Brown, also an unrestricted free agent. Kuminga, he had his team option declined by the Hawks, so he's available to sign with whoever. Predicting what the market for that guy is going to be, I have no idea. Do the Celtics do anything to make me happy and make all this hurt go away? I'll be watching for that as well. But I'm not holding my breath on that. So I think that's kind of where we're at. Those are the things I'm watching for. So I expect to record my next podcast probably next week. There should be enough trades and free agent signings to give me enough to talk about within the next week. Beyond that, my episodes probably will get a little bit less frequent as free agency cools down. We get into the dog days of summer. Don't necessarily feel like I need to stay at one episode a week all off season, but we'll talk more about that on the next episode. We'll probably end up giving my winners and losers of free agency at that point. But before I let you go, be sure to follow Words with Wallace on everything that includes Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Also support the show on social media, on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, even Facebook for my old heads. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.